Hi, thanks for joining us today. We have Microbix Biosystems presenting. CEO Cameron Groome is here, along with COO Ken Hughes and CFO Jim Currie. As most of you know, they reported their Q3 numbers last Friday, so the focus of this presentation will be mostly on those numbers. For people that don't know the story that well, there's a previous webinar you can check out, or you can email me and I'd be happy to book a meeting for you. With that out of the way, a couple more things. First off, there will be Q&A throughout the presentation, so just feel free to add your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And as always, this will contain forward-looking statements, so if you'd like to know more about those, they are in the Microbix presentation, which has just been updated on the website for this presentation. With all of that out of the way, I'd like to introduce Cameron Groome, who's going to tell us a little bit about Microbix and then get into the Q3 numbers. So feel free to submit some questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Deborah. And I'd like to thank everybody who's taken the time to join us on today's webinar. It's great. It provides us an important opportunity to speak to both the accomplishments and the challenges of Q3 and update as to our corporate outlook during what's been a very dynamic pandemic year. We'll spend a few minutes at the beginning just as a quick run through of our corporate presentation, just speak to a little bit of what we're doing for those on the call that are less familiar with the company. The forward-looking statements I don't need to go into. Everybody knows what safe harbor and forward-looking protections are. Company today, with regards to Microbix, we of course are in the business of developing, making and selling biological products and technologies. And in our context, what that means is we're a leading supplier of native antigens, and these are the proteins that on the surface of viruses and bacteria that antibodies in your immune system react to, and these are used to drive important infectious disease tests. And we've applied that same biological expertise on viruses and bacteria to develop a range of laboratory-oriented quality assessment products that we call QAPs. And these are the controls, positive and negative patient sample mimics of different infectious disease conditions that can help labs ensure the accuracy of their medical tests. And that's an important and growing portion of our business. We also own the rights to kinlytic urokinase, a clotbuster biological drug that has existing approvals from the US FDA and Health Canada, and have been working diligently to partner that project to enable it to be brought back onto the market, which is a very important clinical indication and ever more important these days. Corporately, our sales in fiscal 2019 were 13.4 million. We describe it currently as averaging about $1 million a month. And those sales are primarily to multinational diagnostics companies. And with the exception of some of the turbulence in Q3, we typically run close to break even. And of course, our goal is to continue driving the sales growth such that we more than cover the required overheads of a business of our nature, of quality systems, manufacturing diligence and whatnot, new product development. And we want to expand our gross margin, grow our net earnings, and drive share price appreciation for all of us. Management team, I won't go into in a great deal, but you have the three C levels on our call today. Myself, Cameron Groome, as CEO, Ken Hughes as COO, and Jim Currie as CFO. We also have a great bench alongside us, mentioned on this slide, and additional to this, an exceptionally talented group of people that we're very proud to lead. Our board is likewise quite experienced, with our founder, Bill Gassel, serving as executive chair. We have Mark Cochran, who was just retired from being executive director of Johns Hopkins Medicine. We have Joe Renner, who is chairman of Zydus Pharmaceuticals, believe they're number 3 or number 4 by prescriptions filled for small molecule pharmaceuticals in the United States. Martin Marino, ex-General Counsel of Merck Generics Group, is our audit committee chair. Bon Ebro Plantaloni, my predecessor, serves as on the audit committee as well. Peter Bletcher, very dynamic and talented physician and entrepreneur, and that rounds out our board. Capital structure is fairly conventional and well balanced. We do have about a 35 million market cap has been the range lately, with reasonable and growing trading liquidity. And we'll talk a little bit about some steps we took this quarter to further enhance that liquidity. And we have some partners as well, such as BDC and some long-standing investors that have supported us with some debt in our capital structure as well. The 3 business divisions we have are, as I mentioned, our antigen production, and we are a critical supplier to more than 100 global makers of diagnostic tests for infectious diseases. And of our sales, over 95% are exported outside of Canada, where most such tests are manufactured. And we do have excellent growth prospects for that leg of the business, but in COVID-19 pandemic year, we'll go into some of the dynamics that have sloshed that around a little bit in the near term. Our second element of our business is our QAPs products, quality assessment products, and these are the third-party controls that are used to help ensure the accuracy of lab tests and the proficiency of clinical laboratories to run those tests. And this is an important growth area for us, and we'll speak to some of the growth we're seeing right now with regards to that component of our business. And thirdly, that we'll also update on is our drug product that Microbix acquired due to that drug being produced with the very same culture expertise, cell culture expertise that we use in our global viral antigens business, which is a very large opportunity for us also. In terms of immunoassays, I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but I do encourage people to review it from a technical point of view. An antigen, for our purpose, is the component of the foreign substance, foreign virus or bacteria that raises an antibody response. And tests that look for the antibodies in someone's blood are very useful. They can suggest the presence of a pathogen. They can establish whether somebody has been exposed to a pathogen. And in fact, they can assess whether somebody has known immunity to that pathogen. So these are very helpful tests in many established disease areas, and they cannot be replaced by the nucleic acid or PCR type tests that we've been reading about so much lately. And we produce these on a very large scale. We produce multi-gram quantities of certain viral antigens, which is often 1 million times more than you can buy from a lab supply company, who probably buys from us and aliquots it. So very important, critical products, and most often as a sole source supplier. And we produce a whole catalog of those products. Respiratory, childhood diseases, pediatric maternal testing, sexually transmitted vector or insect-borne diseases, all of these very efficiently, economically, and at scale. And we'll speak to a little bit of the quarter results where one product had an issue from this whole catalog, and what that means and how that's being resolved. Growth outlook for the antigen business, we see that as very positive, particularly as the healthcare environment restabilizes. There will definitely be a greater global attention to respiratory and infectious disease testing more generally. Personally, I think it will be a long time before a politician stands up in a legislature and argues for reduced reimbursement for infectious disease testing following the pandemic. But we are facing some short-term issues where healthcare resources are stretched thin in the emergency, just with the physical equipment and trained staff availability, as well as whether patients are able to legally go see their doctor or are comfortable going to see their doctor, has meant that some non-emergency tests are seeing reduced usage. And while we're largely have navigated that extremely well, we are seeing some impact of it in 2020. Talk about our quality assessment products beyond the immunoassay antigen category. And these are the controls that are used to help ensure the accuracy of medical tests. And they're there to really emulate real patient samples, but be safe, reliable, and stable, which a patient sample kept in the back of the fridge is most certainly not. It can degrade, it can be inconsistent, it is also infectious. And where we play is in the provision of these third-party controls to help ensure the accuracy of testing. And no doubt everyone has read quite a bit about problems with the accuracy of COVID-19 testing as a key example. And we have all the expertise within our organization to grow organisms, inactivate them, augment them, formulate, stabilize, validate. And this is what's enabled us to drive forward into this important area of opportunity. And there are three segments that we describe. We describe the PT segment, which is the predominantly white label sales to a limited pool of lab accreditation organizations. And that's currently about $1 million a year business for us now, and has been for a few years. The second segment is larger. That is to sell such products to the test makers directly, to be often bundled with their test kit consumables, so that a box of point of care test kits, for example, will contain some number of positive and negative controls along with that, to really ensure that the technicians know what they're doing, that the instrument's being used properly, that it's still working, that the test kits have not been used or stored improperly that could result in damaging false negative or false positive results. And the third category is still larger, much larger, in fact, in providing these products to the clinical laboratories themselves. And the clinical labs need to have a quality system that ensures that hours, days, or weeks of tests are not giving inaccurate results and putting the whole healthcare efforts at risk. And we've moved to license our products as medical devices to be able to sell directly to that segment, which is a large opportunity for us. And we've created some very leading edge products there with our COVID-19 caps and our HPV caps. And we've actually over this year built a very substantive distributor networks and began to move product through that network. And again, at very good margins. And the second two segments proceed in red. Very importantly, these are Microbix branded products most often that the end user sees as Microbix, and that we gain the reputational franchise for doing the creation, manufacture, and distribution of those products. So a bit of development history. Our sales to the first segment, PT, to the lab accreditation organizations began in 2008. And that was with a limited number of SKUs and a limited customer base, originally predominantly in North America. It's grown geographically, but there was an unaddressed need for new products, and that led sales of that category to plateau. And then in 2018, we moved forward with a new category of customers and new category of products, offering these caps, controls to diagnostic original equipment manufacturers, the test makers, to support their test kit sales, to also conduct contract development of custom controls and support their registration of new instruments and tests. And sales in that segment have now become meaningful. And thirdly, in 2020, we began to sell directly to the labs under ISO 1345, the medical devices ISO. We licensed our first products in the fall of 2019 for human papillomavirus. We established international distribution links, and we'll go into a little bit more about that. And those culminated in the spring of 2020 with a series of agreements, 5 agreements, in fact, covering more than 22 countries. And we began to actively ship product to those distributors after completing a tremendous amount of regulatory paperwork and quality assurance paperwork on how products would be transported from our shipping bay across by air, by sea, by freight, how they would be received, how they would clear customs, how they would be stored, how they would be distributed. These are not trivial exercises for highly regulated products on which people's lives depend. So that took time and was completed late in Q3 for initial shipments to those distributors. So where are we now? Well, you know, $1 million a year is great, but of course that's not enough to justify the infrastructure of a public company, nor is it enough to interest larger investors. But it is just the beginning. It is the basis on which we're building our QAPs franchises, and the Proceed business has begun really to move. We've generated now over $200,000 in sales year to date of Proceed, selling directly to OEM instrument makers and supporting development and licensing of new instruments under contract. In Red Controls, with shipments just in predominantly in June internationally, there were some sales preceding that into Canada and some sporadic direct sales into Europe. But most of these sales have been recorded in the latter part of June and passed 140,000 quite quickly. So where we see moving forward is with more of these labeled products, better pricing, greater volumes, and continuing to launch additional products. And you can see on this slide 2 different SKUs are Proceed, in this case, as a swab format, and our Red Controls, in this case, as a vial format. We have Proceed vials and Red swabs as well, so there are a variety of products involved. And I'll speak a little bit to our development of QAPs for COVID-19 in vials and swabs. This was a big project that we undertook starting in February. Our team, to their great credit, recognized that SARS-CoV-2 was very much looking like a global pandemic well in advance of the World Health Organization's declaration, and work therefore began on a prototype product to help the control of reverse transcriptase PCR testing for active COVID-19 infections. By March 30th, we had externally validated prototype QAPs for COVID-19 tests and announced it at that point. By April 21, 3 weeks later, we had received Health Canada Medical Devices Establishment License for Microbix, and were able to begin supplying those products to labs in Canada to support the accuracy of their testing efforts. A few weeks later, on May 7th, we received US FDA registration that enabled the sale of products into the United States. June 1, we concluded a contract with a key point-of-care test developer to create custom Proceed QAPs to support their license and marketing of their instrument platform. June 5th, we secured EU CE mark registration for our COVID-19 QAPs, both in the vial and swab formats. And as I mentioned, in the last 2 weeks of June, after completing all logistics with all these distributors, we were able to ship initial inventories of both COVID-19 and HPV. And you can imagine it's been quite a intensely active and busy spring. And thank goodness we did do this, as it has had a material benefit to healthcare in a variety of markets in supporting the reaction to this pandemic. And on this slide, it's amazing to see that I believe we clipped this presentation on March 25th, when there were 550,000 COVID-19 cases reported globally. And now just on the confirmed diagnoses, we're well north of 20 million. So it's been quite a year on many levels. Second very leading edge product in our QAPs category has been the high risk types of HPV. And this is a very prevalent infection in sexually active adults. Most people are carriers of one or more types or strains of HPV. The high risk types, of which there are about 15, are directly implicated as the cause of a whole catalog of human cancers. And patients' HPV infections can be stratified to help diagnosis and treatment between high risk and low risk, but the utility and adoption of such testing has really been hampered by a lack of adequate controls. We developed very high quality controls that are safe, stable, and reliable, and we began we registered those in the fall of 2019 for the European Union and the United States, and then had to build a distributor network. And that was underway prior to COVID-19 emerging. And in fact, what the engagement of our distributors was driven originally by HPV, supplemented, of course, by COVID, but the actual execution of distribution agreements was in fact delayed by COVID. And certainly the uptake and meaningful sales of our HPV controls have also been delayed because every PCR machine in the world has been co-opted to keep up with the demand for COVID testing. But this is an opportunity that is completely unimpaired for the longer term and is very much in front of us, and will certainly offset any ebb in the future that we see coming away from the pandemic. So very nice to have multiple products. And this is something that we're going to continue to add to. We see tremendous opportunity for more infectious disease-oriented QAPs, and will continue to drive novel, innovative, and proprietary products. And I'm very pleased at the level of engagement between our team and the global leaders in the diagnostics industry. And with almost all of the major companies listed on this slide, we've developed very strong and close relationships with this. And that is very much going to inform our creation of new products as we move forward, and as the clinical laboratory industry faces ever more scrutiny about the accuracy of their tests. There will be greater and greater need for and usage of third-party controls, such as those that with which we're developing. And where it makes sense to do so, and where we can add value, we'll create such products. And our objective will be to capture perhaps up to 10% of the overall value in our control franchise as that builds. Just shifting gears a little bit on Kinlytic. Those of you who followed our company know this is an asset companies had for a long time. In fact, in many cases, a frustratingly long time. But we focused this project in very sharply on a lucrative sub-indication, and that is the clearance of blocked biomedical catheters, which means it is a much tighter project scope. We've established costs and timelines quite precisely. We've been working very closely for a long time, with a couple of years now, with a well-respected New York based licensing agent. We have prepared all due diligence materials to withstand the best possible level of scrutiny. And we're now moving forward on this. And we are engaged in confidential discussions with multiple parties. I'm pleased to say our policy remains consistent, that we will make a disclosure on the execution of a binding LOI or a definitive agreement, but this project is still very active and is proceeding. I'm hopeful that we will execute an agreement that enables bringing this very important product back to market. Ironically enough, Kinlytic has the best safety and efficacy record of any drug for treating pulmonary embolisms and clots disseminated through the body, and would undoubtedly be very valuable if it were available today or within a very short period for this pandemic. But the fastest timeline that we can see for refiling is about 2.5 years, which really doesn't enable us to directly assist patients in the context of the pandemic, which is unfortunate but a reality. So a little bit in terms of fiscal 2020, the outlook has been changing back and forth, literally day by day. We've been insulated from a great deal of this by contracts and longstanding relationships and order books, but we are seeing some impact of it. Of all infectious disease testing, it is only that for COVID-19 that is up in 2020, and most of that is of the reverse transcriptase PCR test variety. Many people had bet wrong on the broad usage of serology testing in COVID-19. We did not. There are other opportunities emerging, and we will absolutely be pursuing them. We created and launched COVID-19 products that are entirely leading edge, and the first international sales of those have been good. They only occurred, as I indicated, in late June. The customer reactions have been uniformly very positive, but in turn it takes time even for institutions to qualify for the use of a control internally in their systems and accept that. But we do see we are seeing reorders from our distributors, and we are seeing very positive relations from end-use customers and positive results in the hands of OEM collaborators of ours. We've also had some challenges in 2020 year to date, and we've navigated any number of supply chain issues, and we'll go into that a little bit later. But one unforeseen issue resulted in multiple bioreactor batch losses in Q3, and that certainly had an impact especially on our bottom line results for Q3. And looking forward, we're looking for targeting stabilized antigen sales for Q4 and fiscal 2021, and we're very firmly expecting continuing strong growth in QAPs revenues, which you'll recall were up 141% year over year for Q3 and up 52% year to date versus fiscal 2019 year to date, in spite of products being available only for a few weeks in Q3. So summary and outlook, we've been very busy doing a lot. We have launched important new products internationally with HPV and SARS-CoV-2, aka COVID-19. We have more innovative QAPs planned. We've built a global distributor network and customer base for our QAPs, and that will continue to grow. We've implemented full-scale use of our bioreactors, and while Q3 had an issue, this transition is expected to shortly enhance our gross margin, of course, as well as our capacity. We're still very active on Kinlytic partnering, and we're very diligently pursuing improving top-line margins and bottom line for share price appreciation. So with that, all of our actions are really towards driving positive real results for the company, and our takeaway is unchanged with that we have very much a real business with big opportunities. Your team, the management team, is working very hard to make all this happen, and we thank existing investors for their continuing support and new prospective investors for their consideration of our company. So with that, that concludes the presentation element, and now we'll talk a little bit more about Q3. And Deborah, perhaps you can let us know if there are any particular issues you'd like us to touch upon.
Do you want to just do the Q&A?
Well, I'll touch a little. Maybe I'll just recap a little bit of what we've actually done between March and June, as I think that's very important. We, as I mentioned, we first validated a prototype at the end of March, and since then we've gotten important COVID-19 products licensed in Canada, the US, and across the EU. And in that same period, we've formalized distribution agreements with 5 very well qualified companies that provide us market access to more than 22 countries into which we've now begun to ship product. We created a global external quality assessment, or PT program for COVID-19 tests, engaged a contract for customs cap development, and we also secured, of course, essential business designation and support from our many customers. And all this was done in the teeth of ensuring the safety of our employees, product flow to our customers, and the integrity of our supply chains. So it's been quite busy, to say the least. Ken and Jim, I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, I'd just like to add with regards to the CAPS business that, as the viewers probably know, we secured some funding from FedDev Ontario to support in part our build out of the CAPS specific facility at our second facility at 235 Watt Line, so we can build that capacity on a go forward basis to service the global market for CAPS. And that, in parallel to everything Cameron just mentioned, is underway. In fact, there are contractors in the facility right now putting finishing touches to various and sundry elements of the new lab and production suite, specifically for the generation of the CAPS products under ISO 13485 accreditation. So I think it's something very important to understand, that we're pursuing that opportunity long term.
One of the things I'll just enhance as well is, intuitively, one might suppose that a viral pandemic means that all diagnostics sales increase, but that's not the case. In fact, sales for almost everything but COVID-19 have faced differing levels of pressure. And that, of course, relates to periods where people were just locked down, patients being reluctant to come in to see physicians for more routine checkups, and the healthcare system and lab capacity constraints. And generally, we've weathered this extremely well due to our contractual relationships, but we have seen a bit of top-line pressure on order deferrals on antigen sales, and certainly we've seen some big delays in the uptake of HPV. We were looking at some very wide national level acceptance of our controls, driving some very large volumes. So while we've made a good chunk of that back and may yet make more from opportunities related to COVID-19, it hasn't been all beer and Skittles, as the saying would go, with regards to the pandemic as a virology company. One of the things I'll just touch on that we can't fully describe on a call like this is the extent to which we've been in close contact with the leading global test makers and developers. And this is entirely a result of the leading edge work we've done in HPV and COVID controls. We're working very closely with a number of the largest global diagnostics companies, which is really informing our selection and development of new caps. But our practice corporately is not to be talking about what we're doing, but to disclose something once it's done. So we will see further caps being developed and launched. Our goal is to have a steady stream of intelligently selected design products coming out, and you'll see that continue through 2020, 2021, and beyond. So some very good things happening that are not, certainly not instant, but are well underway corporately. In terms of Q3, maybe Jim, I can ask you for a few comments about the quarter.
Sure, Cameron. I guess one of the comments that you'll see in our disclosures around our margins is around the product mix, and I think it's increasingly important to understand that our range of margins for products is anywhere from 25% to 95%, and it's highly dependent upon what sales took place during a particular quarter that will impact the current quarter and also comparisons to the previous quarter and the prior year quarter. And we saw some of that product mix impact in the latest quarter. And as Cameron mentioned, we had some issues around the bioreactor product, which historically hasn't been the predecessor product hasn't been one of our strongest margin products, and the bioreactor was and will improve the margins significantly on that particular product line. And we've started to see some of that. However, we had some batch related product supply issues for the bioreactor products that impacted our Q3 results. But we should see that improve greatly as we move forward. And the same applies to, we're also starting to see the impact of our QAPs business. Our QAPs business is expected to be a stronger margin business than our historical average and should be bringing our margins up. So needless to say, I think we're all very disappointed in the level of margins that we saw in Q3 and year to date from where we hoped and expected things to be at this point in time in 2020. And that's what we expect to see starting in Q4 and into our 2021 is starting to see us get towards some of the targets that we set for ourselves. We're making capital investments in our business. As Ken outlined, we're renovating our 235 facility for our QAPs business. That's well underway. We're making investments in capital equipment in both our 265 watt line, which is our antigen base location, as well as 235 watt line. So we are making the investments for our future growth and future development. Cameron, I don't have anything else in particular.
Thanks, Jim. That's a great run through. And just speaking to one of the issues that was faced in Q3. This is a Cogent slide. You can see in the picture of the bioreactor suite, you can actually see some blue barrels that contain media. And in those blue barrels are bags that contain the media that are supposed to provide a sterile barrier to keep that media from being contaminated by the environment, which, although clean, is not aseptic. And in fact, during the quarter, we had an issue where a leading edge company, international ISO certified company with whom we deal and would normally buy our media bags from, was out of stock, and we had to move to the media bags from another globally certified top tier company. And then bang, 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 we lost a series of bioreactor batches and rapidly investigated and established that there were actually breaches in the bag material and the tubing of the secondary supplier's product. And that cost us a tremendous amount of yield and a tremendous amount of cost. And while those batches might not have all been sold in Q3, they might have only been shipped in later quarters, the cost of those batches, as soon as we know there is a contamination event in that product, will not pass our QC and QA processes. It needs to be written off right away. And that's what we undertook to do in Q3, and why there was frankly an unexpected loss incurred in Q3. There were other foreign exchange and some other factors that certainly contributed to that, but the largest impact relates to lost bioreactor batches, and that's something that we're working very diligently to make sure will not recur. But we had another instance, just to show the supply chain challenges during a pandemic, of some media-related chemicals we ordered from another key ISO-certified company, and instead of a box of critical chemical reagent, we received an empty box containing a bra. That is not within the quality system elements that one expects of an ISO certified company supplier, but we've managed through many challenges in our supply chain successfully and continue to do so in the context of the pandemic. It happens that this one issue evaded us with regards to another company's quality fall down. And we're very regretful of that. And our team is working on further yield and optimization enhancements above the batch loss issue to catch up some of that foregone margin. Ken, did you want to expand on any of that?
Yeah, I mean, in this particular space, in a complex business like everyone else, we've had issues with supply chains and, standing orders that had long runways. In some cases, got turned into just-in-time deliveries. But our operations and purchasing team have been working really closely with suppliers, and the suppliers themselves, of course, have had issues with their own supply chain for these complex products. And it's worked very well so far. In the most part, and most of our manufacturing has been humming along. But as Cameron quite accurately said, in one particular situation where we had to flip to a second supplier of materials, that the materials that were provided were just not fit for service. And this affected multiple batches of Rubella and bioreactors, and multiple batches because they're all being made simultaneously because of the capacity, the maximum capacity we're running right now. Anyway, this specific issue was quickly jumped on by our team, has been resolved, and in fact we flipped back now to the original supplier of the bags and hosings. Now their own supplies are in place, and so we don't expect this to occur. And really, I just want to make the point that the team is remaining vigilant and scrutinizing all aspects of the physical and supply chain elements to mitigate the risk associated with these supply chain difficulties and maintaining redundancy in all the products we use for these critical raw materials. So once again, we very much regret what happened with Rubella in the bioreactors in this last little quarter, but it has been resolved, and we don't expect the same issue to recur in future as we build margins on a go-forward basis with this excellent product.
Thank you, Ken. Well, I don't know that there's specific, greater specifics that we should go through, Deborah, other than to address shareholder questions. So if you have some questions from the attendees, it'd be our pleasure to address them.
So are the Q3 bioreactor losses covered by insurance or under the purchase agreement?
No, unfortunately not. We don't have this form of insurance, and I don't think it would be available for production of a complex biological. We certainly will be investigating alongside the supplier of what has happened. And certainly will not be paying that particular invoice. But if one gets too much in the business of suing suppliers, you won't have any. So, there's only so far you can go for recourse of that nature.
Yeah, we're having some pretty unambiguous discussions with the suppliers of the particular part that failed.
So do you expect to receive any compensation from the supplier?
Certainly not of an amount that would offset the loss that's been incurred. No.
Okay. And how do you plan on ensuring in the future that you can secure media bag supply from the first supplier?
We've been a longstanding purchaser of those products. We will obviously validate a different second source for that nature of product. and work to ensure that we have a primary and a secondary supplier of sufficient quality.
And when you say you sold 140,000 of RedX controls year to date, do you mean as of the end of Q3 or as of today? And if today, how much was included in Q3?
As of Q3.
Okay.
The majority of that happened in Q3.
Correct.
Okay. US and European labs are recommended to use third-party CAP for control of tests, but how many actually use third-party, and how many other firms offer the same as Microbix in this segment in Europe and in the US?
It's a great question. It is, in some areas, on an emergency basis, public health authorities have been providing infectious patient samples for use as an emergency control and permitting that in the near term, given the status of the emergency. As non-infectious validated third-party controls come available, that is converting. That is happening at as soon as the labs can make the time to make that transition. So, this is still a pandemic. It is still an emergency situation. So there is limitation on the time people can spend towards conversion, even though it is absolute best practices. So it's really striking a balance between trying to get test results out the door that may not be optimal versus slowing down to make sure they are optimal. And that's the juggling act that the lab quality directors are facing. With regards to the second part of the question, what other products are available? We understand there are products, controls that are available that have to be kept at -80 storage conditions until right before use, which is obviously a very inferior product position versus our swabs that are room temperature stable. And we also understand that there are multiple point of care instruments where the reagents used in liquid vial controls are not compatible with the point of care test chemistry. And there may be tests for which our swabs are the only controls that will function appropriately on the instruments. And we're aware of multiple situations of that, which will also help to drive sales, particularly of our swab controls for COVID. Ken, did you have any further color on that?
Well, I think that's it. I mean, you substantially covered it. I mean, clearly our materials are resembling clinical specimens, and the entire workflow controls for sampling handling and technician training, as well as the data and the RT-PCR reactions themselves, on whatever technology is being used. Our objective was to create controls caps that mimic the nature of a clinical specimen. Things that are frozen are clearly not like clinical specimens. If you're using a material from a person that has not been frozen, obviously a dried swab is exactly what one would get from the back of the nose on a COVID test or anything else of that nature. So I think we're ahead, a long way ahead with regards to technology in this particular regard, in its stability and the fact that it's a proper facsimile of a clinical specimen.
And then I have a couple more questions on the COVID caps. So you've seeded distributors with COVID caps products. What do follow-on orders look like?
The first thing I can emphatically say is yes, there are follow-on orders. So when you're seeding distributors, that's the very first question you want to get past. The follow-on orders are beginning to accelerate in size and frequency, which is the next criteria you want to see. So we are expecting subsequent quarters to each be up from prior year significantly, and appears to be on a satisfactory growth trajectory for us. So yes, customers are liking the product when they sample it. For example, if a distributor takes a few hundred samples and gives a couple of those to, if they took 200 samples and gave 2 positive and a negative to 50 labs, for example, with that 200, then the question is how many of those labs turn around and reorder and perhaps order a 3-month supply. Then each one of those 50 labs sampled might turn into an order of a couple of hundred. And those start to move forward quite quickly, and you get into the exponential growth scenario. So that's what we're really driving towards. And for some of the OEM contracts or relationships where companies might include our controls in test kits, those can go very quickly as well and mount from thousands to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of units. So there's the clinical lab sale channel, which is the red products, principally through our distributors, and then there is the proceed products through the OEMs for inclusion alongside their actual test cartridges.
And I think as we indicated, it's also been some of the stocking orders were shipped out in the latter part of June. So it's fairly current that our distributors have got these products, and they're just now starting to get feedback from their customers.
Yeah, and we have received reorders from distributors, even within weeks, which is to us an excellent sign.
Recently, the FDA gave EUA approval for a saliva-based test. If this caught on, is this something Microbix would also supply antigens, or would they need QAPs?
There's a couple approaches. I've seen a gargle-based test used in the Netherlands that's not regarded as accurate as the RT-PCR nasal pharyngeal swab or throat swabs. A saliva-based test I've heard about. I've not seen the technical specs for that yet. We are working and are generally aware of 3 broad categories of tests, those being RT-PCR, antibody, and antigen testing, and are very closely evaluating all of those. The saliva one I just heard about last week, and I can't really comment technically about it. Ken, what about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, given the nature, it's fine that it's come to the fore. It doesn't really exist in our space. I mean, there are issues associated with this test with regards to the nature of the sample and with sensitivity and specificity. So it's a quick and dirty, and that's fine. But obviously, a spit test, if you gargle with Listerine, may be somewhat compromised. So I think this is fine. We exist in a situation where accuracy is very important, and we've gone past that kind of quick and dirty reality because everybody's very much aware of the problems with false positives and false negatives associated with these types of testing. It's our objective to reduce that. So particularly in the case of COVID-19, if somebody's a false negative, you're actually positive and you're going around infecting people. This is clearly not a good thing. And we're at the full clinically relevant, full workflow analysis to make sure that false positives and false negatives are minimized on a go-forward basis.
It's a great point Ken makes. If a test is not sufficiently sensitive, it's giving false negatives and sending infectious people back out to infect others. And if it's giving false positives, if it's not sufficiently specific, then it can sideline, healthcare workers or other professionals that are vitally needed. So you want high sensitivity, high specificity, low rate of false negatives, low rate of false positives on the tests. Notably, for example, I was viewing some information from a large clinical laboratory chain in the US recently, and they are operating at 100% capacity for their RT-PCR testing, but they're only operating at 15% of capacity for antibody testing for that very reason, that people are looking, saying, well, what does the quick and dirty antibody test that in this case, you don't know whether past exposure was to a coronavirus or this coronavirus, and you don't know whether past exposure grants you immunity. So, well, it's nice to know from perhaps from an epidemiological standpoint, it is only a nice to know. And consequently, that test isn't nearly as widely accepted as was once thought. So these are the sorts of things we'll be looking at, but we'll do some digging on the specific saliva test, and if the questioner can reference the specific company, we can respond with greater detail.
Okay, the remaining questions that I have deal with Kinlytic. So I guess the main question is, do you think that you're going to be able to find a partner and create a positive return for shareholders? Is there a timeline on this? Is there any specific hurdle preventing this from moving forward?
Yes, first of all, I do expect we will identify a partner and be able to bring this project forward. We're very much working upon that with counterparties that would be great partners for this project and this asset. What has to be agreed is there needs to be a partner that's willing to put up $20 million US that's required to bring the product back to market, to validate new manufacturing and to validate that the newly manufactured product does what the product used to do. It's not an insurmountable barrier, and 20 million in the context of biological drugs is certainly quite small, but it is too large for Microbix to take on its own. So we're looking to identify a partner with the technical comfort with this genre of product, with the economic capacity to fund that, the timeline of 2.5 years to refiling from funding, as well as the ability and capacity to be able to market this to a hospital-based group of clients, and a U.S. initial focus. So it's not a huge list, but it's a very specific list. So I'm pleased to say that there's multiple confidential contacts that are very live, and the parties at the table could form great technical and economic partners for us. We need to get to a definitive agreement with an appropriate split of economics between the partner who's bringing the fresh capital and Microbix that owns the asset and has the technical expertise to make it happen. Time-wise, I would love to see, to get something signed, sealed, and delivered in calendar 2020. But certainly, this has been a project that's been in the Microbix stable a long time. So I'd hesitate to put a firm deadline on that, but certainly that's an objective.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's it for questions. Cameron, do you want to give some final thoughts on the quarter and outlook for the rest of the year? Anything like that?
Absolutely. What we've really been able to do in 2020 is to move the company substantially from a relatively anonymous supplier of critical materials to the diagnostics industry to being a much more widely recognized supplier of cutting-edge, branded, proprietary control products. And this opens up new fields for us, tremendous new revenue opportunities at higher margins with a faster inventory and sales cycle at better margins. And we've done all this in the face of a pandemic. So I'm very proud of what the team's delivered, and I hope that's appreciated by shareholders that are taking the long view on what we're endeavoring to create as our company. And we continue to execute with this. We will absolutely see the sales growth that we're all looking for, the margin improvements, the bottom line, and the share price appreciation. And Kinlytic remains very much icing on that very attractive looking cake that we're baking.
Okay, great. I think that summarizes things very well, so we'll leave it there. Thank you all for your time today, and thank you for the attendees for participating. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out, and I'll make sure that those get answered. And everyone have a good morning.